Excuse me if I'm a bit grumpy, I have not yet had my breakfast. Yep, that is the extent that I will go to for you guys. Well, today I am on a mission to separate facts from fiction when it comes to fasted training. Some of that is fake news, some of it is true and has the science to back it up. I mean, all it takes is a quick Google and you'll soon see just how conflicted the topic of fasted training really is. Now, whatever you want to call it, training without fuel, or should I say specifically without carbohydrate, will have an effect on your body. And depending on your overall goals, there are claims that there can be benefits. Yet there are also experts who warn of the dangers.
Getting carbohydrates and a small amount of protein into your system before you train, like for me, is non-negotiable and will enhance the quality of your training, will enhance your recovery and your adaptation, and will make sure that you stay physically and mentally healthy as an athlete.
Now, as a recreational athlete, I feel like I really should listen to Dr. Emma Ross. Yeah, why am I and so many of you guys still pulled into the fasted training method?
For every athlete which has a race duration of longer than 2 hours, I would say, for them it's super important that they have as good fat burning as possible. It can be a very important and efficient tool in their training to reach their goals easier or better.
Are you as confused as I am? Well, there is a huge amount of research out there. There's also a lot of opinions on the topic of fasted training, and it's really easy to go down the rabbit hole and still emerge just as confused as to whether you should be adopting this method or you should be avoiding it at all costs. Well, that's where I was a few weeks ago. Now I have it all, the good, the bad, and the science. Now we're going to be hearing from experts on either side of the debate, and I'm going to be doing my best to bring you everything that you need to know to work out whether fasted training is for you. But before we go any further, I think we should address some of the myths that surround fasted training. It is not proven to aid weight loss. There is no evidence for it improving inflammatory markers. Just a few fasted sessions in a week won't move the needle. Well, some of those points have probably left you with questions. And in fact, I hope that they have, because we are going to be answering them, or I should say, the experts are going to be answering them. Now, personally, I come at this topic from, I guess, quite a divided opinion. I'm unsure, partly because of my history as an athlete. So I was a swimmer at school. I swam 5 mornings a week from the age of 13 to 18 consistently. And I had a 4:45 a.m. alarm. I didn't once consider what I was doing was fasted training, but I definitely did not consider ever eating before my training sessions. And some of my friends, they used to get up earlier and have breakfast, which I just thought was bizarre. I was like, A, you're missing out on extra sleep, which I really wanted. And B, I knew I wouldn't be able to stomach eating something before a hard swim. So yes, some of our swims were really hard. These were not just all aerobic swims, but I never felt like I was lacking. I never felt like I was struggling with the swim sessions or not able to really push myself. So yeah, I didn't know it was fasted training, but it turns out that it was. That said, I always got excited about breakfast. I had a huge amount at breakfast and throughout the day, and I was always really well fueled for the afternoon training session. So yeah, I was like, well, surely that's fine. I mean, if I managed to perform then, and now I do far less training, if it was okay then, surely it's fine now. Or did I damage my body when I was younger? Was I limiting myself? I don't know. It at the time just seemed like that was really quite a normal way to approach training. And now in the present day, I guess I'm more aware of it, but quite often I will train early in the mornings and go for an easy run, but I'll often have a coffee and I'll have milk with that. I'll have a flat white, that's my go-to. And I want to know, is that amount of milk changing the fact that it's giving me carbohydrates and calories? Does that mean I'm not fasted? Is that enough fuel to make a difference? As you can see, this is a huge topic and one that I am excited to delve into. As we've seen, this is a passionate topic for so many, and none more so than Dr. Emma Ross, co-founder of the Well HQ. Now, without giving you too much away, she is a strong advocate for training only when well fueled, and she has a compelling argument. I'm going to dive straight in with wanting to know why carbohydrate is so important for training.
Pretty much everything we do can be fueled by carbohydrates. And when we talk about exercise, people think about, when we are doing low intensity endurance exercise, we're using fats as our fuels. And that's true, but it's never a binary idea of when we do high intensity exercise, we burn carbs, and when we do low intensity exercise, we burn fats. We're always trying to use carbohydrates. And then in the background, we can also bring in other macronutrients to fuel us, but carbohydrate is really the main source of energy. And so it's vital if we want to do any kind of intensity of exercise to have carbohydrates. And also research shows that if we have high carbohydrate intakes before and during longer duration exercises, 60 minutes and beyond, then we can delay fatigue and we can enhance our capacity for doing high intensity exercise. And that might be a sprint finish. It might be, kind of putting in the effort up a hill. So even if we're doing longer duration exercises, carbohydrates are really important for supporting our performance. So when we train fasted, we tend to utilize more fats as fuels. So we make ourselves a more efficient fat burning machine, and for endurance performance, that's really good. It also stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis. So we make more mitochondria. Mitochondria are the parts of our cells which are helping us make energy. And so you think, actually, for the same training session, if I'm doing it fasted, I'm getting all of that adaptation. So that was a big tick, and I saw lots of coaches using that approach. However, the more research that got done in this space showed that if we trained fasted during our training, we had more breakdown of muscle. So actually the training adaptation could be compromised, because ultimately our body is saying, where do I get energy from? And it's going to have to take energy from other places rather than the stores of carbohydrate that we have. So it's going to use fat, but it's also going to use protein. So some of the risks associated with being female and doing fasted training, but we certainly know that a lot of the original research was done on male athletes. And so there is definitely a sex difference in terms of our response to fasted training as a female athlete compared to a male athlete.
So you've more touched on sort of the detriment to training rather than the dangers per se. But what is the difference between men and women? And is there any real sort of red flags of why you shouldn't use it or when you shouldn't use it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much against female athletes using fasted training, simply because the benefits that I've sort of explained, it makes us better fat burners. Women are already better fat burning machines than men, just how our physiology is set up. So if you take out that kind of benefit, and we're always here weighing up risk benefits, right? So we're saying, what's the benefit of using this approach to what are the risks to us, whether that's performance, whether that's health. We know that when women underfuel and we become in energy deficit, so that means we don't have enough energy given what we're expending. If we do that repeatedly, we start to cause quite significant dysfunction across our whole physiology and psychology. So we know there are significant consequences for girls and women who underfuel. And we know that when you are doing fasted training, you're more likely to underfuel. And just to add to that, when we've researched, and I say we, the research community have looked at energy deficiency, it's not just about not getting the calories in. So someone might say, well, I train fasted, but then over the course of the rest of the day or the week, I'm eating loads. In a female body, the timing of our delivery of energy is really important. And so every time we enter a phase of low energy, which would absolutely happen when you train after a fast, the body starts to send those signals to go, okay, conserve energy. And that's when we start to disrupt menstrual health, those reproductive hormones and the long-term consequences. So it's not just about the overall calories we take in, it's about the timing of them. And we know that particularly for women, eating a pre-exercise meal is absolutely vital to stop the disruption that we know happens when we have low energy availability in our body.
Okay, yeah, you got that point across. I guess, and you answered the sort of a question I did have was well, if you eat enough throughout the day, because obviously if you're missing your meal early on, then that is a chance you might not have the calories, but you've already said that it's the disruption. But on that point, say if you're having the word fasted training is relatively vague and the time frame from your last meal is sort of open to depending on how late you eat. But say you had a top-up meal just before bed or some, chocolate milk or something that's, relatively nutritious before bed, and you're just sleeping, would your muscles and your liver glycogen still have enough to actually tell your body that it's got fuel to be able to train in the morning?
I mean, an overnight fast is a fast. And so 12 hours of not eating is enough, that our body has used up, our glucose. It's using liver glycogen to kind of keep our blood sugar stable. And we need to top it up if we're going to fuel ourselves for subsequent exercise. Getting carbohydrates and a small amount of protein into your system before you train, like for me, is non-negotiable, and will enhance the quality of your training, will enhance your recovery and your adaptation, and will make sure that you stay physically and mentally healthy as an athlete. And so having something, it could be a smoothie, it could be, a yogurt with some nuts on, like it doesn't have to be a full-blown meal. But after that overnight fast, I think it's really important to have something with carbohydrates and protein in before you go off to train.
After listening to Emma, you would think it's an easy decision to make. Fasted training is dangerous. We should not do it, full stop. Yet, for the fairness of this video, I obviously need to look a little further. I mean, there must be some significant benefits to fasted training. Otherwise, why do I and so many of you guys still find ourselves dabbling in it? That said, I've had to dig really deep to get someone who's happy to chat on camera about the positives of fasted training. Now I know from my email correspondence that coach Joseph Spindler has some strong evidence that backs up his decision to use low carbohydrate availability training sessions for some of his athletes.
When you go for an Ironman and you take 9 hours, you only have a limited amount of carbohydrates you can spend. And to do any kind of performance, you always need to burn carbohydrates. Even if you go very easy, if you have to sleep, you're burning carbohydrates. So if you have no carbohydrates, you're dead. You can't do anything, you can't perform. So you can't run out of carbohydrates. And when you produce a certain power, you always have a certain amount of the energy comes from the carbohydrates, and another amount comes from the fatty acids. Yeah. And then obviously, if you use more of the fatty acids at a given intensity and less of the carbs, you can just maintain that intensity for longer. Or you can, if you have enough carbs, you can use a higher intensity for the same amount of duration. So for everything, I think for every race which is longer than 2 hours, the percentage of fat burning is the most important performance factor. Because you are limited, your carb intake is limited to whatever. The body can only absorb 90 grams of carbs or maybe 120. That is, we need to do more research to understand really how much it can absorb. But let's say you can absorb 90, then you can absorb 90 and that's the maximum. So you're limited in carbohydrate uptake. And then, of course, a very well fat-trained athlete still can absorb 90 grams of carbs, but he's using a higher percentage of fatty acids. So he can use those additional carbs with a higher percentage of fat. So he will be able to go a higher intensity.
So when would you prescribe it to athletes that you train? And how would you incorporate that into their training?
Normally you can do a guesswork approach where you say, okay, the goal is Ironman training. The goal is good endurance. So then you prescribe this kind of training. But the more appropriate approach is to have a real performance test. So this is what I do normally when I start working with an athlete. I do a performance test to really see, okay, how good is the fat burning? Because obviously, if the fat burning is already as good as possible, then it makes no sense to have to really push that to another age. It's just already as good as it can possibly be. So then let's focus on something else on the training. So it really helps. You need to look at the goal of the athlete, and then you need to look at the actual metabolism of the athlete, and then you need to say, okay, if the goal matches with the actual metabolism, then just keep doing what you are doing. But if there's a discrepancy and you can see, okay, we can improve the fat burning, then I would prescribe this kind of training to reach that goal easier or better or in less time.
And do you ever approach when training men and training women differently? Because women are naturally already better at fat burning if we were sort of starting on a zero platform. So do you find that you end up using it more for your male athletes than your female, or is there any sort of obvious patterns there?
I use it to a less extent. But you also have to keep in mind that carbohydrates are stored mainly in the muscles, and female athletes have less muscle mass than male athletes do have. So that also means that they have less carbohydrates stored. So usually if you have a 50 kilo female athlete, that's about 200 to 250 grams of carbs stored in the body. And you can imagine that if they already use like 40, 50 grams an hour in an aerobic effort, that they will run out of carbs very quickly and more quickly than men. So they have to have a better eye on not running out of carbs, not running too low in carbs. So yes, I use it with both female and male athletes, but not as extreme with female athletes because they tend to run out of carbohydrates more quickly than men do.
So you've worked out that an athlete would benefit from it. When would you use it in their training? Sort of, is it in blocks within a period of their training, or is it in a regular basis on certain training sessions? What's your sort of protocol for actually using fasted training or low carb availability?
So what you have to keep in mind is that adaptations in the VLMX, so in the fat burning, takes quite a lot of time. So we can change your VO2 max within 2 weeks by 7 to 10%. But it takes more like 6 to 8 weeks to have a significant change in the VLMX. So I would keep an approach where you do that kind of trainings several times a week for several weeks. You would not do it for every training. So if you do a very high intensity interval session, then that's not the time to do also like low carb training. You need to fuel it well to be able to reach the desired intensity. But then maybe you can do the next time where you have more like a sub-threshold endurance session. That goes well together with a low carbohydrate approach. Yeah, so I would do those sessions 2-3 times per week over several weeks, like 6 to 8, and then do another test, reassess if there is a desired change already measurable in the fat metabolism.
Okay, and what would you say to those people that are really anti using fasted training in any capacity?
You know, I would ask them for the reasons that the athlete will not recover as quickly, that they run the immune system down. But I think always when you take that concern seriously and look that there is enough calories going into the body to fuel the effort. So calories are good, but carbohydrates, you want to sometimes have a lot of them if it's intense and sometimes not so many if it's more an endurance related session. Then I think you can do very well. I would not say there's something which says no, it's you should not use it or can't use it. You know, it's always the training session sets basically the stimulus, and then the nutrition during that session is just a tool to kind of intensify that stimulus. If you only eat, not train, you would have no adaptation in performance, obviously.
So up until now, I've just been presuming that when I get up in the morning and I go for my run without having anything to eat or drink, that I am in a fasted state. And obviously I am fasted because I haven't eaten, but I don't actually know what my metabolism is doing and how much it's using fats and carbs, because obviously, as we've found out so far, it's a ratio. You're always somewhere on that ratio. And I can't go to a lab every morning, so I managed to get my hands on this device, which is called a lumen, and basically it can detect what my metabolism is doing. Haven't had enough coffee yet, sorry. Metabolism, and will tell me how much fat I'm burning compared to how much carbohydrate.
Hold your breath. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so I've actually been using this for quite a few days, a few weeks now, and I've been really fascinated by it, and using it throughout the day as well, because obviously your metabolism does change as you eat. But for this purpose of this video, I've been focusing on the morning breath, and I started off as a couple of 5s, which I was quite sort of surprised at, that even though I'd been fasting, my body was still using carbohydrates in the morning, and then I think maybe it's just because I've been more conscious of eating a little bit earlier, and just trying to be sort of having less high sugar at night, even though that's not the purpose of this. It just shows what a device does. My numbers have become more even, and I've been around the 2/3, so obviously my body has still been
using a certain amount of carbohydrates in the morning, which is probably why I'm quite used to being able to go for a run and feel fine on that. And I've not been in a pure fat burning state. So obviously, if I did more training and adaptation, maybe I could move towards that. But I just found it really interesting to have a look at, and just something to sort of make me a little bit more conscious of what I'm doing and when I'm eating, I suppose.
So we've got the strong points for avoiding training in a low carbohydrate availability state, as well as some valid reasons that support it. With that in mind, I'm hoping that this next conversation with scientist Sam Shepherd is going to clear up those grey areas and just clarify how and when you could potentially use it.
Yeah, so I think if we're going to use it, then it's better to try and use it in specific sessions. And those sessions are largely the sort of lower, moderate intensity type sessions, maybe up to an hour, 75 minutes at most.
Okay.
If we start to use it in, our higher intensity sessions, our interval sessions, the natural sort of intensity of those sessions means that we will tap into and use carbohydrate as the primary fuel source anyway. So using it in sessions where fat is going to be a dominant fuel source and we are asking the body to use fat, and using fasted training on top of that can enhance that a little bit and get more, burn more fat during that session. That's the optimal scenario.
Okay, and if we have unlimited fat stores, why are you saying only use it for an hour to 75 minutes? Why can't I just go and do an ultra and run all day when I've got X amount of fat?
Yeah, I mean, you can try and do that if you really want to. I think we also need to remember that even at moderate intensities, whilst fat might be the dominant source of energy, it's not the only source of energy. Even at that intensity, we're still going to be using a proportion of carbohydrates in the body. So you might be able to go for many hours, but at some point, theoretically, you're going to start to run out of those carb stores in the body. And that's when the pace is really going to slow. And maybe that is when you start walking by the end of the race.
Okay, I mean, we've sort of experimented in the past. I'm not planning on doing it anytime soon, but another thing that I don't quite sort of haven't got my head around is, can you start fasted training and then reach that time scale, like you say, an hour or 75 minutes, and then take on some carbs? Are you still getting those initial benefits of fasted training, even though your session has not been a fasted training session?
Yeah, so I think if we took a 3-hour bike ride at the weekend, we might get up early, try and get out before the family are up, get out the door before we've eaten any food, and we certainly can start that session without having any food, any breakfast beforehand. And we might ride for maybe an hour, as long as it's a sort of moderate intensity, and we'll still be burning more fat during that hour than what we would have done if it was preceded by a sort of high carb breakfast. If it gets to an hour and you're starting to feel a bit low on energy, then certainly take on some energy in terms of carbs, gels, etc., whatever you sort of want to use. And then the second half of that session, you're still going to be working aerobically. You're still going to get benefits in terms of the training volume effect. You're still going to be able to execute a 3-hour ride well. But the first part of that, you're going to burn a little bit more fat than you would during the sort of...
I mean, that sounds really appealing. Is there any downside to that if you're doing an aerobic level ride? I can't see any reason not to do that.
I suppose the other context here is the wider training volume across a week. So that's always a consideration. And you need to make sure energy balance is in a good place. And what you're doing during a sessions is just as important as what you're doing outside of a session to achieve that. So that's the one consideration where you might not use it, let's say. Okay.
I know a lot of people do sort of start to almost blur the line of fasted training going into having not having enough fuel, but as long as you're fueling through the rest of the day, then that isn't an effect, is it?
No, and that's absolutely fine. What I always try and advise people not to do is overdo the fasted component of that session. Again, if we go back to that 3-hour ride, trying to do it for 2 or 3 hours, maybe when you're not accustomed to it, and like we all do at the weekends, we're riding with our friends, we get a little bit carried away at certain parts of the ride where it becomes more carbohydrate dependent, then you're really asking your body to dip into those carbohydrate stores more often than you might like. If you're very controlled in that ride and disciplined, then there is an opportunity maybe to do 2 or 3 hours. But we also need to make sure that when you get home, you're not straight into the fridge and overcompensating for the energy you've burnt during that session. And that's one of the risks, I think, with fasted training, that you might overconsume calories afterwards if you kind of overdo it in the session itself.
Final question, and it comes from a sort of personal angle because it's something I'm just naturally not good at taking on carbs. And I do sometimes worry that if I don't, if I do a fasted for the convenience reasons, if I'm doing an aerobic swim like I did this morning, I haven't eaten. But then when I have a race, does it mean I'm going to struggle more to take on hit those carb levels that might be my targets because I've done more fasted training? Is it detrimental to your race carbohydrate intake ability?
I think if you do a lot of it and do sessions like the higher intensity sessions fasted, or the race prep sessions in particular fasted, or a big component of fasted, those are the opportunities to train the gut to tolerate the carbs on race day. So naturally, if you kind of avoid doing that or limit how much you're going to do, then you will suffer on race day in terms of, at least if you try and then go for the top end or top range of carb intake. So you kind of want to balance the two, really. Some fasted training is probably okay. Logistically, that's a good thing, time efficiency. We're also going to get some benefits to fat burning. But the other flip side of that is the race-specific sessions, the hard sessions. That's when we should start to consider fueling to make sure we execute a quality session, but also train the gut to tolerate the carbs under sort of those intensities that we're working at on race day.
So many opinions and so many pieces of evidence to actually back them up. However, when you start to really look into the research, there's pretty much always a caveat. Now, I am starting to get a little bit bored of reading or hearing that it depends. However, it does turn out that it does depend on so many factors. Now, I just want to take a moment here to point out that if you are a young athlete, you're still growing and developing, then please avoid fasted training at all costs. Fuel is your friend, and you need to be well fueled to be able to really sort of excel and also to grow. Also, if you've ever experienced any eating disorders, then please do not experiment with fasted training. And that leads me on to looking at pro athletes. Now, I think it's safe to say that there's just not really any evidence or any reason for pro athletes to use fasted training, because if you think about it, it can reduce the recovery time, it psychologically can limit the ability to push, it also obviously caps you at working at that low level intensity, and it can lead to a potential calorie deficit, not able to get the amount of calories in if you're training huge amount of hours. That said, as amateurs, life is a bit different for us. We are time restricted, and it is okay if you really feel that, well, there's the odd fasted session that, you know, it will be able to help with that mitochondria efficiency and you'll get a little bit more out of that session, then great. But do bear in mind that you might not be performing optimally in that session. So if after watching this, you're going to continue doing fasted training if you were before, or you're going to maybe experiment with it, then please bear in mind these 4 points. That you want to do, any of your fasted sessions need to be a low level intensity. You want to fuel straight after your session. You want to make sure that you're getting enough carbohydrate in throughout the day. So that's a really key point there. And also just try to limit it to 1 or 2 sessions per week. And remember, fasted training should not be confused with something that's assisting weight loss. In fact, it can actually cause you to eat more throughout the rest of the day because you end up being really hungry, and the raised cortisol levels can alter your fat distribution and it just messes up with your hormones in that sense. But I think after watching this video, you are well aware of that. So if you do choose to use it, pick and choose your sessions wisely and just bear in mind your overall performance goal. I'm gonna leave you with that. I would love to know if you are a fan of fasted training, or if this video and listening to these experts has changed your opinions. Please let me know. Do that in the comment section below. Thank you for watching this deep dive on fasted training. Hopefully see you next time.